History of the Plebeians and Patricians in ancient Rome. Conflicts between them. Rome wasn't built in a day, but if you want to understand ancient Rome, you've got to understand this: the haves and the have-nots. In ancient Rome, the social divide wasn't just between rich and poor, it was between two distinct groups with different rights and privileges, the Patricians and the Plebeians. Now, let's meet the players. First up, the Patricians. These were the wealthy, aristocratic elite, the 0,1%. They traced their ancestry back to the founding families of Rome and held most of the political and religious power. They were kind of like the old-moneyed aristocrats of Europe. You know, the royal families and the landowners. Then we have the plebeians. They were the commoners, the farmers, the artisans, the merchants, basically everyone else. They made up the vast majority of the population, but didn't have the same rights as the patricians. So we've got two groups, but how did they interact? Well, not very peacefully, to put it mildly. The patricians had all the power, and the plebeians, well, they wanted some of that power. So there was this long-term struggle, a social conflict known as the conflict of the orders. The plebeians had enough of being sidelined, so they started this centuries-long campaign for more rights. And they did it through a series of peaceful protests called secessions of the plebs. Basically, the plebeians would leave the city and set up camp outside to demonstrate their discontent. It was kind of like the American colonists protesting British rule, except with more togas. Now, the patricians weren't exactly thrilled about these protests, but they did make some key concessions. In 494 BCE, the plebeians won the creation of the tribunes of the plebs, who were elected officials that could represent the interests of the plebeians and even veto laws that were harmful to them. It was kind of like the early version of the U.S. Senate, except with more sandals. And then in 450 BCE, after decades of protest, the plebeians won the creation of the 12 Tables, Rome's first written laws. Before this, the laws were kind of unwritten, and the patricians, well, they had a lot of influence over how they were applied. But with the 12 Tables, the laws applied equally to everyone. It was kind of like the Magna Carta, except with more sandals. Now, it took centuries for the plebeians to gain full equality, and honestly, they never really achieved it. The patricians always held more wealth and power overall. The cool thing is, as time went on, the everyday folks, those plebeians, started to snag more rights for themselves. Can you believe it? They didn't just stop there. They eventually climbed the ladder all the way to the top, landing some of the highest positions in the Roman government, including the consulship. How awesome is that? It's like watching an underdog story unfold right in front of your eyes. So, in the end, the struggle between the patricians and the plebeians created a more balanced and representative government in ancient Rome, and it also inspired democratic ideas about rights and representation for centuries to come. Rome continues to live in our hearts today and in the bones of our precious republic.